All right, welcome everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to this evening's presentation, Caught in the Crossfire, the Apsáalooke Nation and Homeland, and the Bozeman Trail that passed through. This series, based on Michael Punk's Ridgeline, is generously sponsored by Kenyon Noble, Stockman Bank, and Humanities Montana. You can check out a copy of the book Ridgeline too. We have some at the circulation desk if you're interested. My name is Liz. I work here at the Belgrade Community Library as the Adult Services Librarian. Before I introduce our presenter, just a few quick announcements. First, the bathroom and emergency exits are behind you. Please silence your cell phones. And then thank you all for wearing masks. We have a few extra if anybody needs them. This is great so we can continue hosting live events and to protect our speaker and all of that. And finally, if you're participating in our winter reading program, which is open to everybody, and it goes through the end of February, please be sure to add your name to the sign-up sheet at the refreshments table. You'll get an extra entry towards winning one of our winter reading prizes, which are all super great. I collected them myself. They're gift cards to local restaurants and organizations, entry tickets to the hot springs, the museum. I have a trail ride for two if you are interested in that. And our upcoming presentations for this series includes next week's on weapons technology with the Museum of the Rockies, and our author event, in 2 weeks, not next week, and then our author event with Michael Punk on February 10th. So we hope that you can attend those too. All right, so our presenter tonight is an Apsáalooke scholar and is on the board of the Extreme History Project. Please help me welcome Shane Doyle.
Thanks so much, Liz, and I might just remove my mask while I speak so people can hear me. So I'm going to speak tonight on how the Crow tribe fit into all this, because I think that's a curiosity. I know growing up as a kid, I always wondered, and partially because I lived. I grew up and lived literally a mile from the famous Little Bighorn battlefield, and knew nothing about it. Didn't know who fought in it really besides Custer and Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, the big names. Didn't know how the Crows fit into that. I was never really explained that in school, and so I kind of had to study it as I grew older. And then I came here to Bozeman. I grew up on the Crow Indian Reservation, like I said, in the Little Bighorn Valley. And my parents lived on the Little Bighorn battlefield for 22 years. My dad just passed away last year, and so my mom has since moved. But so all those years, and my dad for 30 years, it would have been 32 years if not for COVID. And him passing away, did the reenactment of the Little Bighorn battle. And so they would host, up to 1,000, 1,200 sightseers on the anniversary of the battle. Every year, the last week in June, and they're still doing it. So I invite all of you, if you get an opportunity, to go down there and take it in. So I grew up there. I came here to Bozeman and got a bachelor's degree in education. I returned home and taught in the public schools for 4 years. Then I came back to Bozeman in 2002, and I pursued a master's degree in Native American Studies. And that's when I started to delve into more book learning, I guess, about this history, this time period. And then I taught Native American Studies for many years at MSU, 14 years. And during that time, I finished a doctorate degree in curriculum and instruction. And so I wrote my dissertation on the archaeological excavation that occurred at the site of the second Crow agency, which was established in 1872 and lasted right up through, I take that back, 1875 and lasted through 1884. So that's the one on the Stillwater River south of Columbus. Yep. The first agency, and I have a photo from the first agency here, was established right after the first Fort Laramie, or the second Fort Laramie Treaty. Of course, that Fort Laramie Treaty was signed because of the Fetterman Fight. I mean, the Fetterman Fight, I think, was the signature event that really electrified the nation. And in the book, it describes a little bit about the time period. It was the nation was getting ready to celebrate its 100th birthday. And then the news that, I take that back. I got it confused with the Little Bighorn battle. The Fetterman Fight, was no doubt the event that kind of tipped the scales in terms of deciding to sign a treaty, close the forts, and so there was a mixed bag for Native people in the treaty that came from the closing of the Bozeman Trail. And the Crow Indians were, throughout history, seemed to be, even though they tried to do the right thing, on the losing end of that equation. So I'm going to describe a little bit about that history in here and how that all unfolded. But anyway, just a little bit more background on myself. So after I completed my doctorate, I continued to teach, but then I was offered a postdoctoral position at the University of Copenhagen in Denmark to participate in a genetic research endeavor. And so I worked for them for 2 years, and then during that time, we repatriated several remains, ancient remains, and decoded remains from an ancient skeleton here in Montana, 12,600-year-old Anzu child. And so all of that experience has really kept me and led me to thinking deeply about ancient history here in Montana, going back the past 12,000 years. So I haven't really spent a great deal of time thinking about this particular time in the 19th century because that's really been written about by practically every historian that's ever tried to write a book about the West, historically speaking. And so I try to avoid that topic because it's been done over. And no one ever even knows or thinks about the people who were here before horses. They were here for 12,000 years. I think we should know a little bit about them. So that's where I've tended to focus my research and my publication and my curriculum development. But I like this time period as well because it offers up an opportunity to contextualize all this stuff and to offer some tidbits of facts and information that the general public typically does not know about. And that's what I like to really, try and uncover and reveal. Because to me, that's what's exciting and interesting. Stuff, what haven't we learned yet that would shed some light on some things that still remain mysterious? Or maybe they don't seem mysterious at all. Maybe they just seem flat out obvious, but we're just completely wrong because we're looking at a two-sided mirror or something, right? So just to preface my presentation with that. And also that one of the individuals who's key in this whole thing is a guy by the name of Plinicoos. And Plinicoos has had such an amazing impact on, the state of Montana, the nation in general, and especially my life. I have to say that as a kid growing up in Crow Agency, I attended the Crow Agency public school, and at that time there was a picture of him right as you came through the door. So I saw his face every day, for years and years, and never really knew much about him. And then later as an adult, and even the past few years, I cannot seem to escape this guy's legacy. It is just embedded and integrated into so many different aspects of contemporary life, historical relevancy. his presence keeps circling back. Just this year in November was the 100th anniversary of his talk and his dedication at Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in 1921 at Arlington National Cemetery, where he gave a speech and laid down his war bonnet and his coup stick and his name banner on the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. It's still there at Arlington. This year there was a contingency of Crow veterans that were able to go back and honor Plenty Coups and his presence there that day, what that meant to the nation and to his community. And so that's just one instance in 2021. But I could go on and on and on about the things that keep circling back about this gentleman. The apple orchard that he planted, and many of the trees are still alive. And so now there's this special, apple tree that's getting grafted and, transplanted around because they've proven to be really resilient. And then there's the philosophy that he left behind and his way of looking at the world and trying to, maintain integrity and still find a balance in the modern life. And so I think about him almost on a daily basis, and I see him almost on a daily basis too, because his picture is painted on one of the utility boxes off of Huffine Lane there by Rosars. So anytime you come to a stop at the stoplight, there's Plenty Coups if you're coming south. Plenty Coups, when he was 9 years old, seeking his second vision, climbed to Crazy Peak in the summer of 1861. And he fasted up there for 4 days and nights with no food or water. And on the fourth day, he still had not had a dream. And so, understanding that he had not sacrificed enough yet, he cut off the tip of his index finger on his left hand. Because he'd been fasting for 4 days and all of his internal organs had begun to slow to a crawl, there was no blood that came out of his finger, he said, when he cut it. So he had to pick up a rock and hit it until the blood began to flow free. Then he fell asleep. And then he had this incredible dream that, I can't even go into detail on here. It was an epic, long dream. And some of the aspects of it were kind of Christmas carolish. So a spirit kind of picks him up from Crazy Peak and takes him over to Pryor. And he's looking down, and there's an old man there sitting by a spring. And he's asked the spirit, who's that old man there? And the voice says, that's you. That's going to be you. And sure enough, it came to pass. And then he was taken over to the Great Plains, looking over that area between the Musselshell and Yellowstone River there, east of the Crazies. And I see all the bison on the ground begin to just disappear one by one. Pretty soon, the whole ground bare. And then all of a sudden, out of a hole in the ground, coming all these spotted cows and just filling up the land everywhere. And he saw all this, and then taken to a huge forest and filled with trees, huge ponderosa pine, huge diversity of animals, grizzly bears, bison, everything, eagles, and the four winds come in. And the four winds come in so strong and black and dark that it blocked out the sun. And in his dream, in his book, he talks about feeling sorry for the trees. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Who feels sorry for the trees? This boy did, because of the winds lashing them and whipping them and bending them. Coming in, destroyed this entire forest. Every tree ripped to the ground, all the animals dead. At the end of the storm, the sky cleared, the sun came out, and there was one tree left. And in that tree, one animal, tiny chickadee. And the boy, he came back, he told He came down off the mountain. He barely made it off the mountain. You can imagine being completely dehydrated, no food for all those days, and made his way home. He had some friends with him, and shared that dream with some elders in a ceremony, in a sweat lodge ceremony. And there was an old man in there by the name of Yellow Bear, and he interpreted the dream for the boy, and he told him all these different things, what he thought that dream meant. And then he described what he thought the storm meant. He said, you know that storm you saw, those are the white people coming. Everything's going to be gone. And if you fight them, you're going to end up like those trees and those other animals. You're going to be wiped out. So what this dream is telling us is, when these white people come, we can't fight them. Otherwise, we'll be destroyed. So he had that dream in 1861. And he was, like I said, they said he was 9 years old. So right around 1860, 1861. And then in the subsequent years, gold was discovered in Virginia City, and here came the Bozeman Trail. So he had saw that whole thing happen before it occurred. And fortunately for the Crook people, they understood the importance of trying to make peace with these miners and with these settlers. And so they never fought and they never killed any settlers or miners coming along the Bozeman Trail. And they understood that if they could make friends with these white people, if they could help them, that they would be able to use their military might to keep away the other natives who were beginning to see the Crow land for what it was, the last best place. The land, again, north of the Yellowstone, between the Muscle Shell and the Yellowstone, was one of the best bison pastures. There was fresh water around there. Of course, we know the headwaters of the Yellowstone and the Missouri River are prime habitat for bison, elk, and deer. Wintering ranges all throughout. Lodgepole pines to be harvested. Ceremonial sites. This was one of the sweet spots of the state, and it was right in the heart of Crow country. And they understood that if they did not ally themselves with the U.S. military, that they would be destroyed in a hurry. And even 2 years before the famous Ridgeline incident, actually 3 years before the Fetterman Fight, there was a huge battle that occurred on Pryor Creek that's still legendary. The Battle of Pryor Creek is the short term for it. And it was there that there was a combined forces of Lakota, Cheyenne, and Arapaho, really the same basic forces that fought Custer, that attacked a Crow camp in the summer that was a large Crow camp, and attempted to really just kill them all off. It was an awful battle, and became really famous because the Crows survived. They were completely outnumbered, but they were in their own homeland, they were in their own turf, they knew how to survive, they knew how to escape and get away, and how to fight. And so that incident there was another indication that their homeland was being prized and valued by desperate people, by people who had been getting pushed from the east for a long time. In 1862, there was a huge rebellion that occurred in Minnesota with the Dakota. And that rebellion spurred a huge outpouring of Dakota onto the Great Plains. which displaced more Lakota from their homelands and pushed them further to the west. While all this was happening, there was already a gold rush occurring here to Virginia City. There was the very quickly diminishing herds of bison and elk and deer. And so by the 1860s and 70s, here there was desperate people finding themselves in desperate times, and they were armed with rifles, weapons, and horses. And so it was a toxic mix, I think, at that time here. And the ridgeline battle that occurred, with Fetterman getting wiped out, I think was probably almost inevitable. Thinking about what was really happening here with the Lakota people, again, heading further and further west where the last bison were. And that really kind of caused the Crows really to go all in. Now, some of the things you might not know, and it's not really written about in the history books, is that even though the Crow and Lakota had been at war and had some major battles, they never stopped talking to each other. They always continued communications. Even on the day of the Little Bighorn battle, they communicated. And even before all the big battles, there were Lakota emissaries who visited the Crows and asked them time and time again to join them. You need to join us. Look, the white people are going to take your land. They're going to kill you guys too. You should fight with us. You should join us. We've got a lot of Indians on our side. If we all join together, we can stop them. We can destroy their forts. We can kill these people that are coming in here and taking our land and killing all of our bison and trying to kill us off. Together we can do it. This was a meeting this was a constant message from the Lakota that came on yearly, seasonally, and it only grew louder as time went by. And each time the Crows would reply, "No, we're not. We can't take the risk of fighting these white people. We're not going to join you. You guys have your land. You guys stay over there. We have ours. We're going to stay here." And so they repeatedly refused to join the Lakota, even right up to the Battle of the Little Bighorn in the 1870s. That summer of 1876, the spring of 1876, it was clear that things were going to explode here in the region, with the command from Washington for all the Indians to get back to the Great Sioux Reservation, and just many different things happening. The Cheyennes, had come back or were really trying to infiltrate into Crow country in a way that they hadn't before, and so tensions were extremely high. And even during that time, they were still communicating. They spoke through sign language from afar. They also spoke up close in councils. And the spring of 1876, there were emissaries that approached the Crows and asked them to join the Lakota on their fight. And that was the last time they spoke before the big battle. And then on the day of the battle, the morning of the battle, the Little Bighorn battle, there were Cheyenne warriors who spoke sign language with Crow warriors that same morning. And they both communicated with one another that the math was clear that day. As they say, the numbers have been counted. There's 10,000 warriors down there. Anyone who attacks that camp is going to get killed. And the Cheyennes were telling the Crows that, you guys are going to die if you go down there. And the Crows were responding, yeah, we know that. And we've told Custer that too. And that morning they told Custer, don't go there. There's a lot of warriors there and they want to kill you. They're not going to run away from you. You think they're going to run and take their women and children and go hide. They're not. They want you to come. And Custer just flat out didn't believe them or didn't want to believe them or whatever. But that was some of the communications that were occurring. And then 10 years after the battle, in 1886, Sitting Bull led a large group of Lakotas to Crow Agency for a 2-week visit in the summer of 1886. Very, very few people know about it. The reason why they went was because the Lakota had no horses and they wanted to get some horses from the Crow Indians. And so they asked them for horses, and the Crows said yes. And so the Lakota came over Sitting Bull and they picked up the horses and they spent 2 weeks and they had council together and they talked. And at first, when Sitting Bull first got there, the tensions were really high. And there was a guy, one of the Crow warriors at the time went and challenged him. Kind of told him off to his face, and kind of like challenged him to fight. And Sitting Bull didn't respond. He just sat there. And so that guy didn't do anything. He just walked away. And then, so that was the first day. And then the next day or so, there was a dance, and some other guys went over and said something to Sitting Bull and tried to challenge him, but he wouldn't fight with them. And then after that, that was really the only incidences that were recorded that people mentioned happening. And then after that, they started having serious talks. And that's when Sitting Bull told the Crows, the white people are going to come to you and they're going to tell you, we're going to divide up your reservation into little pieces and each family is going to get their own piece. Don't let them do that to you. Just tell them we're going to keep our reservation all whole for all of us. He said, because they're going to divide you up. They're going to make you go against one another. They're going to chop up your land, and then whatever that's left, they're going to take it for themselves. So he gave them good advice. He could see what was going to happen with the Allotment Act. The Allotment Act did occur. At that time, the Allotment Act was being pushed. It was just a few years later that it came into fruition, 1888. The Crows refused to allot their land. They didn't have any kind of an allotment act until 1920. And that was a congressional act. It's called the 1920 Proact. And in that time, the reservation was allotted to individual families. I think it was 800 acres. And for families with children, it was like 2,000, I think. And the Crow Reservation was quite big at the time, and there wasn't that many Crow Indians. And so when it was all allotted, there was a big chunk of land left that was still unallotted, and that's when the government opened that up to white settlement. And that's the reason why at one point in time, almost half the Crow Reservation was owned by non-Indians. And I think it's still probably pretty close to about 40%.
Is that how come, like, if you go down to the dam, there's a lot of white people along the river?
All the land along the river is owned by white people.
And that's the reason?
Yeah, that was the Allotment Act that did that. And then the white people also saw the value of the river bottom land. One of the largest wheat farms, the first biggest mass wheat farm in Montana was established right there on a Crow Indian reservation. It was subsidized by the U.S. government. Mr. Campbell, the wheat farmer, who established monoculture wheat farming. A lot of his techniques were adopted by the Russians and all throughout the world. And it took him a long time to get that technology, but he used the Crow land and he used the Crow resources, and I don't think the Crows received much on the other end of the bargain there. But like I said, that's kind of been the history for them, right? So when Plinikoos had the dream and the soldiers came and all this warring was going on, and they told the white people, "Don't worry, we're with you. We're going to protect you. We're going to keep these other Indians away from you. We'll give you safe passage. This is our land. Go ahead and go through." Despite all that, their reservation was shrunk, their land was taken, all the treaties were broken, they were treated just like all the other Indians. And I think that's the irony for a lot of Crow people, which was like, well, Sitting Bull and Crazy Horse, they fought to the bitter end, and they got just as good a deal as we did. And Plinikoos went out of his way. I mean, when he died, he left his estate to the state of Montana. This is a guy, when he was born in 1850, 1851, the first Fort Laramie Treaty was signed, and it's a 30 million acre reservation. I'll show you a quick map of the area. So you can see this this first treaty here, the 1851 treaty. The reason why that land was designated as all Indian country up there in 1850 was because the gold rush to California didn't go through Montana. It went through Wyoming. It went through the South Pass, and so there was no need for miners to go through Montana. The only pass through Montana was the Marias and this one over here. But who really wants to go that route? I mean, when you've had the South Pass, right? You don't have to go over a butte, the Continental Divide, and then you got the Bozeman Pass, and that's just the start. And when you get over further west, there's more. So this entire area was designated as Indian country, and you can see the original Crow Indian Reservation included all the present-day Yellowstone National Park. And so that was all of our Aboriginal territory, pretty much all of the headwaters of the Yellowstone River. And so when Plinikoos was born, that's what he inherited, 30 million acres. By the time he died in 1934, the reservation had gone from 30 million acres to 2.3. So it went down, lost 90% of its size in his lifetime. Despite that, he donated his land, his home, to the state of Montana. Just consider that. He could have given it to the Crow tribe. He had family. He could have left it to his nieces, his nephews. He didn't have any children of his own. Could have left it to any number of different people, his friends. He chose the state of Montana. Why? After all of the trust that had been broken over the years, why would he do that? It was because he had a vision that was bigger than the petty human things that people do to one another. He was way up there. When he went to Washington, D.C., they took him to Mount Vernon. And he said, "What is this place here?" And they told him this was where the first great chief left his home to the people. He said, "That's what I'm going to do." Except, I'm an American. My place is going to be for everybody. What more could you ask from a leader? Makes me emotional thinking about it. Speaking in public about it. He doesn't get enough credit. In my humble opinion. And the dream, and you can look at his life at the bookends of his life. He first fasted when he was 7 years old. He had this incredible dream. And then, he kept fasting. By the time he was 9, he had the big dream in the crazy mountains. And then at the end of his life, he does a dedication to the tomb of the unknown soldier, and he continues on. And then after he's dead, he leaves his land behind. Now look in the middle and what happened. Those years in the middle were just as important, and they had just as big impact on all of us today. And when I was looking up for a photo of him, I found this. This is an old Smithsonian article. I think it must have been published in the early 20th century, maybe 1910, or actually I think it was in the 1930s, maybe. But in here it talks about, he says, he's a savior for the Crows. You see these two generals up top, Alfred Terry and General George Crook. Plenty Coups saved General George Crook's life, and probably hundreds of soldiers that day on the Battle of the Rosebud, because Plenty Coups was accompanying General Crook from Sheridan, Wyoming, pretty close to the site of the old Fort Phil Kearny, where the Ridgeline attack occurred, up to the Little Bighorn, where he was going to meet General Custer and then Lieutenant Commander Custer, I should say, who was under the command of General Terry, and then troops from here in Mount Ellis, General Gibbon. There was going to be a triangular attack on the Little Bighorn to capture Sitting Bull, Crazy Horse, and all of his contingencies and take him back. And Plenty Coups and about 100 Crow and Shoshone warriors were accompanying General Crook that day as he made his way to the north from Sheridan, Wyoming. And as they approached the Rosebud Creek, Plenty Coups told General Crook, when we get up there where we can't see anymore, that's when the Crazy Horse is going to attack. So we're going to have to take a contingency and go ahead of you guys. And when we get in there, when we break into that fold there, you'll be able to tell if the fighting starts. If the fighting starts, you guys need to get ready. And that's exactly what happened. Plenty Coups took a small group. I think there was like 25, which is, smaller considering that day there was 1,400 men under General Crook's command. And they went into the Rosebud Valley there, and right away they were attacked by Crazy Horse. Crazy Horse and his men had done an all-night ride from present-day Busby. They took their horses all night, and so they were there early in the morning, and then they just waited for Crook because they knew he'd be coming, and they knew that they wouldn't be able to see them. So they had position, and when Plenty Coups and his warriors went in there and took the fight to them, that gave General Crook's men an opportunity to dismount, get off their horses, set up their rifles, load their artillery, set up their defenses. If they had just come through there and been attacked literally by that group of the Crazy Horse had with them, I'm telling you, it would have been pandemonium and chaos. And Crook would have been killed. It would have been just like Custer, because they would have had the element of surprise, right? And these guys, for the Crow Indians and these other guys out here, these were some of the best light infantry in the world. That was what they did. These guys, these other guys that Crook had, not that they were bad light infantry, but they weren't as quick. They couldn't position themselves. They couldn't load their rifles. They didn't have bows and arrows that they could use immediately. And so, there's been a lot written about it. Plenty Coups should have gotten the Congressional Medal of Honor, honestly, that day. We'll never know how many men were saved by his intuitive instincts and courageousness. to take the battle again to these warriors. So he had an incredible charmed career as a warrior, as an adult leader. After the Indian Wars were over, he played a key role in the Crow community, trying to encourage Crow people to accept a new way of life. He opened his own store. He tried to become a businessman. He encouraged other Crows to do that. So, as a young boy, he was a visionary. As a young man, he was a fierce and a successful leader as a warrior. As a mature adult, he was a community leader who gave back to his community and to the public at large. And as an elder statesman, he represented all Native people at the tomb of the unknown soldier, at the dedication of the tomb. I mean, every stage of this guy's life was remarkable. And so I wanted to share that with you this evening because I think it's a story that's not told enough. And it also weaves in and out and connects us with all these different episodes of history. So, how was Pliny Coos connected to the Fetterman Fight? Well, he saw the Bozeman Trail when he was 9 years old. He dreamed it. And he, that dream told the Crow Indians, don't kill any of these white people. If you go back and you look at the Avant Courier, the Bozeman newspaper at the time, during the 1860s and 70s, it was effusive in its praise of the Crow Indians. It had nothing but good things to say. And telling, encouraging lawmakers and just the general public to embrace the Crow people and to keep them close by because these were our best allies in the fight against, of course, the Blackfeet who had been demonized for many different reasons, and also the Lakota Sioux. And so I think the Crow Indians, their story could be almost similarly, or I guess you could compare it to the Nez Perce in a lot of ways, who helped Lewis and Clark, gave them horses, so on and so forth, and Chief Joseph, who worked to try and bring about peaceful relations with the whites, but at the end of the day, it was kind of all for naught. I don't really see it that way myself. I think that's one way to look at it. Another way is that Pliny Coos' legacy, it's going to outlive all of us. It's going to keep on going into the future. This is a guy that doesn't ever really die. And because of that, the spirit of the Crow people, the spirit of that time that led us through this tumultuous period where we could have all been destroyed, is resilient. It's still there. It's in me. It's in my kids. It's in our community in Crow. And I think that, hopefully someday we'll have a book out there that will kind of bring some life to that aspect of this whole interesting time period in history. Because even though it's more dramatic and interesting to think about battles and these incredible conflicts that brought out the best and the worst in everybody, there's also another aspect to these peaceful diplomats who really sought to build bridges and had that in their mind's eye for whatever reason. So anyway, kind of get off my soapbox, but kind of look a little bit more at these native lands. So after the Fort Laramie Treaty was signed in 1868, it's interesting, you would think that because Red Cloud was able to, form this incredible coalition and really stop, the flow of troops into the Bozeman Trail, you would think that if he came to the table and signed a treaty, that it would actually be better for everybody, but actually that's not really what happened. I mean, for the Lakota, they were able to ensure this huge reservation that included the Black Hills. That was, of course, before gold was discovered there. But for the tribes in Montana, it was a downer. The Crow Indian Reservation, in the 1850 treaty, it was 30 million acres, but after the second Fort Laramie treaty, it shrunk to 12. So we lost over half our land base with one treaty. And that was after we had been treating the white people good. And again, trying to do the right thing. So that treaty, what that did was create what we know of as Montana Territory. And you can see right there, and that's kind of central Montana. Now, by the time this treaty is signed, the second Fort Laramie Treaty, we are seeing severe impact on the resources of the region. So there is not near as many bison in 1868 as there were in 1848. There are not near as many elk and deer. The winter camps, they're not as plentiful. So there's a lot going on there that allowed the government to kind of come in there and, claim this big piece of ground. And you can see where it was ceded, where it says ceded Blackfeet, ceded Crow. You have more shared hunting grounds established. But things are changing quickly. And so by the time 1884 rolls around, there's no more bison really. Not to speak of. You can't really hunt bison anymore. And that was the starvation winter that occurred here in 1884. There was about 1,000 Indians that starved to death here that winter. So that was, you figure 1868 was 16 years prior to that. So we're creeping up on that moment in time right there. And people are noticing it. They're like, wow, it's really hard to find bison. We had to hunt, we had to search and search and search. And there's not as many, not only is there not as many bison, but there's not as diverse a group of bison as there used to be. There used to be a lot of cows, and the cows are better for the hides. And now we're finding that there's more males and the bulls, and the balance has been thrown off. And so the animals, the population, and the ability for the animals to rebound from the type of cataclysmic losses that they endured was beginning to come clear to the Indians that wasn't going to happen. And so anyway, that all did come to pass, of course, just like in Pliniku's dream. And so then we end up with the present day reservation system. This map is dated. I would say now, if we saw a present day, up-to-date map, that we would see a lot more native population off the reservation. I think that right now, today, only half of native people live on the reservations. And I think that if you had gone, or if you go back 10 years, I would say that's not the case. I think right now this is the first time that most native people don't live on the reservation. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Primarily, of course, these are economic deserts. People who want to work and even have a place to live, it's very difficult to do that on most reservations. So you're going to have to go to an urban area. Great Falls, Missoula, Billings, those are typically the major spots. Bozeman has got a very high population of native people, but it's pretty much on campus. There's a lot of native students there. So it's kind of a transitory. No one really lives here permanently, very few. Yeah, right? No kidding, huh? Again, I just wanted to kind of review a little bit here, just to kind of sum things up a little bit. The first friendship treaty, that was 1825. That was the Atkinson-Fallon expedition. And they were coming out here just to kind of explore the headwaters of the Missouri. This was, of course, Alfred, Lewis, and Clark. And they had no intention of making any maps or establishing any kind of land exchanges. They just wanted to be friends. And so at that time, they encountered two major bands of Crow Indians. There was the River Crows and the Mountain Crows. And the River Crows were more around the Judith Range and the Muscle Shell. And the Mountain Crows were over closer to the Yellowstone. And the Mountain Crows signed the friendship treaty. At the chief at that time, his name was Red Plume. And he's famous because he fasted. Well, he's famous for many reasons, but he fasted at the medicine wheel, the famous Bighorn medicine wheel. If you ever go over there to the medicine wheel and you walk to the west, there's these big rocks that stick out, and then there's huge precipices off these rocks. You kind of have to scoot off the main ground and then kind of walk along this thing and get up on these rocks and not be afraid of heights. And anyway, that's where he fasted on that rock, and for 4 days and nights. And then his dream was to grow his hair long, so he changed his name to Long Hair. So he signed the Friendship Treaty in 1825. And then, just by coincidence, interestingly enough, there was another very famous chief there for the River Crows named Sorebelly. And he gave the famous quote about Crow country being in the perfect place. And he didn't sign the treaty. He didn't want to sign it. He didn't want to be friends with the white people, he said. But he wanted to be friends with the trappers and traders because he liked that economy. He wanted to be able to interact with that and get things. And so there was a fur trapper that came through by the name of Robert Campbell. And that's when he told Robert, right here where you're at is the perfect place, because anywhere you go from here, it's worse. You know, if you go to the north, it's too cold. You know, it's not that bad, but it's always snowing and winters last forever. You know, if you go to the east, you know, again, it's not that bad. They live okay over there on the Missouri, but their water is muddy and warm. Our dogs don't even drink that water. If you go to the south, you know, it's okay, but again, you get towards the warm water, and there's not that much bison down there, and there's not as many lodgepoles, and it's not that good over there. And if you go to the west, you know, it's okay over there, but all you're going to do is eat fish. You know, and all the people do over there is take fish bones out of their teeth all day. So where you're at right here is the perfect place because we have it all right here. We have high mountains with fresh water coming, ice cold and clear. We can see the sunlight sparkling through it. That's how we like our water. You know, we like our grasslands green in the spring. You know, we like our lakes here. You know, we like our winter camps. You know, he just went on and described why and how Crow country was a perfect place. And that all got written up by Robert Campbell, reprinted and published in the Harper's Weekly in, I want to say the 1830s, the early 1830s. And it was under the title, the manuscript was entitled The Adventures of Captain Bonneville. And it described, you know, Robert Campbell and his expedition out here in the fur country. So then it was pretty quiet, you know, right up until gold was discovered in California, and then the gold rush. And then, you know, again, it didn't come through here. That wasn't until Virginia City. But, you know, Plenty Coux's dream, he had that. No one ever, I've really paid attention, and I've never seen in any document people put Plenty Coux's dream together with the Bozeman Trail. And it's such an obvious thing, you know, I mean, it's just like fits hand in glove, but it's never been cited. And I think that's really interesting, you know, that's part of the reason why I'm sharing that. Then, of course, you have the Fetterman Fight, closed the trail, got the treaty established. You know, where to end all this? I decided I would end it with the last Indian War, the Nez Perce War came through here. By then, the Crow Indians were not in a very good spot. You know, they were cynical. You know, they turned their backs on the Nez Perce. The Nez Perce came in, they asked them for help. They didn't even need help. They said, "We help you, the white people are going to kill us." you're on your own. And they actually even chased them down and tried to steal their horses as they came through Crook country. So there's a lot of hard feelings even to this day about that incident in history. But, you know, I mean, you have to go back and look at what the Crows had experienced and say, well, you know, I mean, it's hard for them to come up with any other kind of conclusion. And the Crows do take a lot of heat. They have over time by other tribes for always siding with the U.S. government. You know, they sided with them during the Battle of the Little Bighorn. They scouted for Custer, as I mentioned. But, you know, just to be fair, there were other Indians that scouted for the U.S. government, and including Blackfeet and Cheyenne. And in fact, it was Tumu, the famous Northern Cheyenne chief, who identified Chief Joseph's camp. And he was scouting for General Nelson Miles, who had made friends with the Northern Cheyenne people. So there was a lot of interesting and unique relationships that were not always, you know, one-sided or, you know, I guess to characterize them, they changed and they were dynamic. And people understood they weren't always going to be able to get everything they wanted, but they could at least try and get as much as they needed to survive as Native people in their homeland. And so I think that's what the Crows were doing, that's what the Cheyennes did, that's what the Blackfeet did. And then just to kind of sum up here, you know, here, oh, that didn't show up very well. I wrote some things in that box, but it sure didn't come through. This photo was taken, this is famous Crow chief, sits in the middle of the land. He was the guy who was kind of the representative of the tribe at both Fort Laramie treaties. This photo was taken at Fort Parker. It was taken in 1871, and here's a little history for you. That photo was taken by the same photographer and crew that then made the first entrance, the first recorded and official entrance into the Yellowstone Park. Less than a year later, it was the Yellowstone Park. March 1st, 1872 is when it was christened, the nation's first national park. By the way, it's the 150th anniversary this year of the Yellowstone Park. And we have a lot of big events on tap, including a teepee village and Native Interpretive Center. A lot of great things in store. What I wrote in there was that this photo was taken about 4 or 5 months after the Marias Massacre, because the Bear River Massacre or Marias Massacre, whatever you want to call it, occurred in January of 1871, and a group of soldiers from here at Fort Ellis traveled up to the Marias and attacked a Blackfeet camp before sunrise on a 40 below morning, believing that they were attacking a camp with a man who had killed a fur trapper up there by the name of Malcolm Clark. Malcolm Clark was married into the Blackfeet Nation, and he'd been killed by one of his nephews named Alchild. And so this contingency from here at Fort Ellis, again, hiked up there 40 below. You can imagine, right? And then they killed everybody in camp, but it was the wrong camp. And then it was mostly filled with women and children. And one of the officers who led that attack was Lieutenant Gustav Dohn. And he then led the expedition into Yellowstone Park just a few months afterwards, and was very insistent upon becoming the first superintendent of the Yellowstone Park. He never received that accommodation or whatever you want to call it, but anyway, he got sent down to Arizona to some park down there, and he ended up dying down there at a really young age. kind of a tragic story. I think he was in his 50s. But there was a mountain named after him in the Yellowstone Park, Doan Peak. And this summer, that name is going to be changed. His name will be taken off that peak. And I think it's because of the history that is now known. I don't think too many people knew the connection between the Marias Massacre and the opening of Yellowstone Park. Most of us would like to think that the Yellowstone Park was, free from any kind of bloodshed or controversy, but in fact, that's not the case. And I thought, well, this photograph kind of fits into all that. These warriors here welcomed that expedition. They welcomed them into their homeland. They knew exactly where they were going. They told them where they were going. We're going to go down this river to the headwaters. And they said, oh, yeah, go ahead. It's pretty nice down there. You're going to have a good time. Be careful. There's a lot of hot pools you could fall in and hurt yourself. But they supported him. And he even told them, there's a lot of quotes from him talking to white emissaries and negotiators and telling them, we know you guys are mining in our mountains. You tell us you're not mining. We see you. You think we don't see you. We know you're mining here. And you tell us you're not mining, but we're going to let you do it. Because we understand that's how you guys do things. But remember that. We're giving you permission to do that. He had a lot of really interesting quotes over the years. And then when they would try to double talk him, one of his most famous lines was, he said, you guys, are you people? Or did you nurse off of cows? Because you don't act like human beings. You don't speak with a straight tongue, And he really put him down that time. He was like, us here in Crow, we nurse on our mother's breasts. We learn how to become human beings. We speak to one another in a way that displays that. You guys don't do that. I don't know what kind of people you are. He was really insulting and, whatever you want to call it. But he was blunt about how he interacted with these white negotiators that consistently took land, broke treaties that he had negotiated himself, right? So he was one of the guys, I think, who was in the first and foremost in front of all that. He was one of the ones telling the Sioux over and over, we're not going to join you. You guys are going to fight these warriors or these soldiers, but we can't put ourselves in the crosshairs. So, when Plenty Cruz had the vision, he was already a grown man and a leader. But I think it's so interesting that these adults and these leaders listened to this little boy. He was a 9-year-old boy. In our society, 9-year-old boys, they're not given that kind of respect. But I think they probably should be. They should be given their due respect. Children are just as important a part of our society as each and every one of us. And I think for me, and I could sum up on this note, looking at Native people, studying the history here for thousands of years, the message that I come away with is, when you have a society that's not under duress, when you have a society where you have infants, toddlers, children, and young adults, and teenagers, and on up the line, middle-aged, and you have your senior adults, and then you have your elders, and then you have your really old people. And when you have all those people existing in the same community at the same time and being to interact with each other, that's when you have a rich and fulfilling community and society, and there's no telling what can be achieved. But when you start breaking those things apart and taking them away from one another, and you don't let the little kids be with the old people, and you don't let the adults be with the young kids, and you put them all in different places for hours every day away from each other, then you start to institutionalize and you start to disintegrate your society. And if you want to see what happens when you disintegrate a society, take a look at the United States of America right now. You know, where it's not exactly an integrated nation that we're enjoying. Uh, not to get too off topic, but I think for the Crow people, you know, for thousands of years, they enjoyed that health because, you know, they had no domesticated animals to take care of. They had no horses, no cows. None of the food that they ate was based on domesticated animals. So all of the food that they harvested while here in the region was wild. That's not necessarily a recipe that humanity can follow. But what it did do was established a connection and an insightful relationship with nature and allowed the communities to become fully developed in ways that most communities around the world have not had the opportunity to do. And the reason why I say that is because we have cultural artifacts that establish and reinforce that concept. Think of plain sign language. One of the most remarkable achievements in human history. You're talking about a language that was shared by 44 different linguistic groups. In order to create a language that has no words in it, it takes a mutual and a simultaneous interaction so that people from different language groups can learn the language together at once. And that requires stable relationships over time. It requires seasonal trading relationships that are not only stable, but driven by each community's desire and need to interact, share, all those things that are innate in the human condition. And they were able to do that because of the pressures on their societies were not great. They had climatic issues to deal with, but they had enough resources, water, food, space, ceremonial areas to not feel threatened by their neighbors. And that lack of pressure and threatening disposition is what laid the groundwork in the foundation to establish a sign language that we've never seen since before or since. And we're never going to see it again. You know, unless we come meet some Klingons out there in, you know, outer space and we have to communicate. They're not going to know what we're saying. Unless we sat down with them for hours and figured out how to share, it would take a long time. And so those are the messages that I take. And then what happens when those things start to break down? Well, then you know, what happens is, in the worst case scenario, you end up what happened here in the 19th century. People are just in complete chaotic conflict, violence, you know, stability has been overturned. So those are some of the lessons I've taken from this time period and reflecting back, and then reflecting forward and noticing again, like how why would Sitting Bull come to the Crow community 10 years after the Battle of the Little Bighorn? He knew they hated him. Why would he ask them for horses? Why would they give him horses? They killed his dad. You know, yeah, he killed many crows in battle over the years. So what was this friendship, this bond that seemingly was always there? And then in contemporary culture, why do Native people continue to interact on a level that is, you know, so basic and familial that it's I don't know how many Indians honestly that you could find in Montana that were just one tribe. I I mean, pretty much every single Indian in the state is at least 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different tribes, right? So, we get along with each other. We have for thousands of years. There's been moments in time where we have fought, had conflict, but that's not our story. And I think that, when you read books about the 19th century that seem to show this hatred that stretched so far back in time, it's not accurate. So that's all I have. So questions, yeah.
I grew up on the reservation.
Right Which one?
Right off the Northern Cheyenne Reservation. I taught at St. Belgrade for 24 years.
Oh, wow.
I associate more with you, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I associate more with you than I do with anyone in this room. Mm-hmm. I see myself as a res kid. Mm-hmm. And when I first moved here, because I've only been here a little over a year, mm-hmm. I would find myself walking up to an Indian to want to say hi, like, hey, do I know you? Yeah. And I was scared to death when I saw so many white people because I knew everybody whose family I taught. Because I had taught their aunties, I had gone to school with their family because I was taken in. Yep. And my kids have people, they call them auntie. Yep. People who are my age that I'm friends with, I'm good friends with them, but they call them auntie. And it is a family structure. Mm-hmm. And it is the concept that it takes a village to raise, and I don't get emotional here, but it takes a village to raise a child. Mm-hmm. I'm Catholic. My kids have 6 godparents. Whoa. Because, and the priest said yes, because mm-hmm. I want my children to know you can have the best of that person, because again, it takes a village. One of the things that you didn't mention that I love about Plentycoop is his quote on education. Yeah. And because I taught, that how important education is. Yep. I don't like the idea that without it, you're under the white man, but I do like it that with it, you are the white man's equal. Mm-hmm. Because to me, education was always so important. And I taught my students, guys, out there in that world, here, you might think of yourself as something, but when you get that education out there in that world, you can be anything. Yep. And I love that. But so the fighting, no, there's so much love to be had in the Native communities.
Yeah, it's still there. Yeah. Even though we still fight, and even though there has been a lot, that doesn't represent the best of our communities.
Not at all.
Did you have? Oh, no, nothing. Yeah.
Today's the most exciting in this country.
Yeah.
I was thinking of the irony of the use of a particular word to describe the fractious nature of our times. That we become so tribal.
Yeah. I just had a guy. I don't know if you're familiar with Brian Bussey. He wrote a book. He used to be part of the NRA, and then he wrote a book that's kind of critical of the NRA. And he emailed me the other day. He wanted to talk to me because he was going to give a TED talk, and he wanted to use the word tribal. And he wanted to use it in reference to, the divisions in our country right now and how tribal seems to best describe this sense of black and white that we can't seem to escape from. And he asked me what I thought of it, and I said, well, I was like, I don't really like it. I wouldn't use it myself, but I'm not saying you shouldn't use it.
I'm just saying it's ironic that we use the term tribal in a very wholesome community building sense. Today it's being used like the word cleave.
It's so true. It's such a negative connotation. It's almost like a pejorative. Oh, you're tribal. And then the other one I told him about that I don't use is I'm going off reservation on this one. It's like, what? Where'd that come from? I have no idea where that came from. I've heard people use that. Yeah, I'm of a mixed mind because even though I'm a member of a tribe, my dad is actually a Ho-Chunk. My mom was enrolled at Crow and I grew up at Crow, but my dad is actually Winnebago Ho-Chunk. I don't. I think that it's more important that, or just as and more important that we see each other as human beings, and that the tribalism in its best sense provides us with cultural vehicles that allow us to reach our ultimate level in the human condition, whether that be self-discipline, whether that be some type of devotion to some idea or person or whatever it may be. A tribal, an ancient wisdom that comes through your grandparents and your parents and funnels down to you and from your aunts and your uncles and this extended family. That to me is what we each use to understand our place in the world and figure out how we can more efficiently or better direct our conscious minds and all these other things. Then there's this thing that is beyond tribal, that is like human beings, dogs, eagles, the water. We're all in this thing together, and this understanding of this all connectedness there that goes beyond tribal and becomes universal. And I think the balance that was struck here thousands of years ago, where you had the native people who had their own tribal ways, of course, but then they developed this universal sign language. They developed like a third wheel somehow of culture, and I think they understood that this was something special, because when you're speaking without words, and you're just using concepts with your hands and your body and your eyes and your mouth. It's like being a father or a mother and looking at twin babies, and you don't know which one is which, but they're both yours. And you've named them, but you can't remember which one is named which one. And so there's a broader sense, not the specific sense, but a more intuitive understanding of this love of what we call life. And I think, again, Plinku's, it's such a great way of thinking about life. And I always tell people too, for Native people on the Northern Plains, we had a ceremonial way of life, and we understood that the highest level that you're ever going to understand about this life and about yourself is going to be on the spiritual level. It's not going to be intellectual or physical. That's not going to be it. When they fasted for days and nights and they found out that your body's just a weak little shell, right? It could easily die. And, you're going to get old and weak and all those other things. But your spirit, it just goes on forever. And with or without your body, it's there. And they figured out how to lean on that, and how to take stock in it. And that's how they measured their wealth. And so that's part of the reason why so many of these ceremonial traditions are all that's left of a lot of Native communities. The sweat lodges, the sun dances, the different prayer ceremonies. The languages may have been gone and a lot of the other things, but those things are still around. And I can't imagine they'll ever disappear because they're too ingrained, right? But yeah, thank you all so much for the opportunity.